Good evening, I'm Maciej Mikos and you're watching World News Tonight live from Warsaw. One person was killed and 24 others were wounded after several bombs detonated at midnight in Lviv, western Ukraine. We'll have more on that in just a moment, but first let's take a look at tonight's headlines. No end to war in sight ahead of the 4th anniversary of Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine. Viktor Orbán vows to block sanctions against Russia amid the election campaign. And Greenlanders say no to Donald Trump's offer of a hospital ship. A deadly act of terrorism in the center of Lviv and another mass missile strike on Kyiv. Russia is intensifying its attacks against Ukrainian civilians. We're going now live to our correspondent, Don Arleth in Kyiv. Good evening, Don. Could you give us some more details of these attacks?
Yes, Maciej, let's go ahead and start off in Lviv, the western Ukrainian city, just 80 kilometers from the Polish border there. One police officer was killed and about 24 others were wounded in what authorities are calling a terrorist attack. Now, at about 12:30 a.m. Near the city's old town, actually just steps from where we stayed just a few days ago, there was not many details known about this. What we do know is that 2 improvised explosive devices went off, killing the police officer and wounding 24 others. Police detained a suspect in this case. However, they're not releasing any further details. So we don't know about the motive. We don't know why this attack happened. Now, Mayor Sadowy talked about this. Let's go ahead and listen to what he had to say.
It is certainly a terrorist act. There are 15 people who are getting medical assistance now. Some of them are in critical condition. One female police officer died. My condolences to family members. Police are working on site. As for damages, many windows were blown out. Investigation is underway. Once it is over, we will clear everything up. We will help people. It was a very difficult night.
Now, of course, across the country, 50 missiles were fired by Russian forces, 297 kamikaze drones across the country. 33 of those missiles and 274 drones were shot down by the country's air forces, they said earlier in a statement. Now, here in Kyiv, ballistic missiles struck several locations. One in particular hit a residential area about 11 kilometers from the center of the city. Now, in the Kyiv region, the total toll here from this strike was 1 man was killed and 17 injured there in the in this residential neighborhood that I just spoke about. One mother and a child were wounded. The mother suffering severe burns and potentially shrapnel wounds. The head of the military administration, of course, gave these figures. Here's what he said earlier.
Unfortunately, 1 man has died. Several people remain hospitalized in intensive care. Their condition is critical, but the medical staff is doing everything possible to save them. In terms of property damage, 10 houses were affected. However, this number continues to rise as reports from residents and owners are processed.
Now, as I mentioned, we heard these explosions. They woke us up late at night. You could feel the shaking of the ground, the shaking of the building, even though it was 11 kilometers away. Well, get this, 60 kilometers away, that one man who died, he died because the building that he was living in collapsed from the shockwave from this strike. 7 others there were also wounded. So it gives you a sense of just how powerful these ballistic missiles are that target the capital here. Now, the Polish Air Force did scramble fighter jets last night. They put the air defense on the highest alert. They deployed air reconnaissance and AWACS, of course, treating the incident very seriously. Now, in the east of the country, in the Sumy region, in the northeast part of the country, 2 brothers were killed and a married couple people were wounded in a double-tap strike. Now, first, a drone flew over these brothers and dropped a grenade on them. They were severely wounded and being taken to the hospital when Russian forces targeted the ambulance that they were driving in and killing the two brothers and wounding the married couple. Also in that area, a Mandalay chocolate and sweets factory, which is a U.S. multinational corporation, was destroyed or heavily damaged there. And we spoke to a Ukrainian MP earlier today, Yulia Sirko, from the Golos party, and she said this could have devastating effects on the local impacts on the local community there, as everyone in that area depends on work at that factory, which will now be shuttered. Maciej, back to you.
That was Don Arleth reporting from Ukraine's capital. Thank you very much, Don, and stay safe. As the 4th anniversary of Russia's invasion approaches, TVP World reporters sat down with Ukraine's top officials for a look back on the 4 years of war and reflection on what the future might hold. Dahmen has this report.
4 years of Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine, and still, the Kremlin's strikes refuse to let up.
I was at home with my 2 children when one of them started screaming, so I ran over. Then I saw that there was a fire here and people were screaming loudly. I calmed my children down. I literally live right here.
Now, in a series of exclusive interviews with TVP World, both current and former Ukrainian power brokers have revealed the toll of the fight and their hopes for the future.
Kyiv was and still a main target of Russians. And from beginning the war, Russians tried to occupy our capital because the heart of the country for Russians was symbolic. It's very important to do that.
That's Kyiv's mayor, Vitaly Klitschko, drawing on his memories of when Moscow first sent its troops across the border. Fast forward to today, and the conflict has surpassed even the Soviet Union's battle against Nazi Germany in World War II.
If you think the war far away from you, if you think this war doesn't touch you personally, it's the biggest mistake.
Ihor Brusilo is a top advisor to Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky, echoing Mayor Klitschko's tone and sending a sober message to the European continent.
Well, it's natural for people not to believe this war can come to their homes, rightly so, and God forbid it happens to any of the European countries. But the reason why it has not happened yet is that Ukraine is holding the ground.
Brusilo is also pleading with Hungary and Slovakia, as both countries threaten to cut emergency electricity supplies to Ukraine, unless Kyiv restarts the flow of Russian oil.
It's more about politics, of course, politics and emotions. What I can say is that, as a suggestion to our Slovak and Hungarian friends, just to be constructive.
Oleksiy Reznikov, too, was there, representing President Zelensky's administration 4 years ago. The country's former defense minister now warning that military powers are operating with yesterday's technology.
All generals in the world, not only in Ukraine, in Europe, in the United States, everywhere, preparing for the former wars. We need to change mindset, especially as a civilian. We need to prepare for the future wars.
From the standoff over Ukrainian territory to U.S.-backed security guarantees, peace negotiations have dragged through a bitter winter. Another round of talks wrapped up this week in Geneva without a breakthrough, as Donald Trump's envoy, Steve Witkoff, suggests that Presidents Putin and Zelensky could meet over the coming weeks. And despite a public spat between Klitschko and President Zelensky, the mayor of Kyiv is adamant that Ukrainian elections are not part of the solution right now.
To make elections during the war is a poison for the country. Can you imagine? We have huge challenge from outside, the Russian aggression. At the same time, to make political competition inside the country can destroy the country from inside. That's why I'm more than sure, first of all, stop the war. And after that, we can talk about election.
One step after another, as winter turns to spring, and a war that has claimed hundreds of thousands of lives moves into its 5th year of fighting.
Hungary wants to block the 20th sanctions package against Russia until oil deliveries through the Druzhba pipeline resume. This latest declaration from Viktor Orbán comes as the parliamentary election campaign in Hungary enters its final stage ahead of the vote in April. Our correspondent Andrew Sweeney has the latest.
The EU's 20th sanctions package against Russia will be blocked, as will its military loan for Ukraine if Hungary doesn't get its cheap Russian oil. That's a message from this country's Prime Minister, Viktor Orbán. Flows via the Druzhba pipeline have been disrupted since late January, significantly reducing oil supply to both Hungary and Slovakia, which depend on cheap Russian energy imports. Ukraine says Russian military activity disrupted the flow, but Orbán says the Ukrainians are at fault and he's retaliating.
We will not stand idly by while the Druzhba oil pipeline is shut down. We will secure Hungary's fuel supply and take necessary countermeasures until shipments resume.
What Orbán didn't say in his statement was that Hungary and Slovakia may also halt emergency electricity supplies to Ukraine as well. Electricity from Hungary and Slovakia account for just over 60% of Ukraine's electricity imports. And a stop in these supplies would come as the country deals with blackouts caused by Russian bombing and missile attacks. According to Czech MEP Tomáš Zdechovský, Poland and Romania are prepared to plug the gap.
Poland and Romania are ready to step in and replace electricity supplies to Ukraine instead of Slovakia. True character reveals itself in times of crisis.
Of course, Orbán's actions may have a domestic political motivation as the campaigning season for the general election on April 12 gets underway. Orbán's anti-EU party Fidesz has made Ukraine a scapegoat, plastering posters of President Volodymyr Zelensky around Hungary, showing him in cahoots with the EU and opposition leader Peter Magyar in trying to take money away from the country. Anya. The party has also released AI-generated videos depicting Hungarian men being dragged to war and subsequently executed. That message, along with unfounded allegations that Ukraine is interfering in the election, apparently hasn't made much of an impact on voters. Polls show Magyar's pro-EU TISA party are on 10% ahead in the polls. There are 49 days until the Hungarian general election, plenty of time for Orbán to try to put more pressure on Ukraine at the EU level and shore up his domestic political support. For TVP World in Budapest, Andrew Sweeney.
Greenlanders want no American hospital ship. Donald Trump's offer has been rejected by the island's Prime Minister, who reminded the US President that healthcare in Greenland is free for its citizens. Paweł Trzaskowski has this report.
For a long time, Donald Trump's Greenland acquisition strategy was based on the door-in-the-face technique. Taken straight from the marketing books, it requires placing a bid so high that it will most likely be rejected.
And I think we're going to get it. One way or the other, we're going to get it. But right now, we are going to do something on Greenland, whether they like it or not. We're going to be doing something with Greenland, either the nice way or the more difficult way.
And once the larger request is rejected, settle for something less. In the case of Greenland, it was NATO's increased military presence in the region.
NATO will not only build our posture in the region alone, but we will also build a more cohesive picture of potential challenges in the Arctic.
But Denmark, whose Greenland is an independent territory of, warned then that the acquisition issue is unlikely to go away.
Everybody asks us, do we think it's over? No, we don't think it's over.
A strategy opposing the door in the face is foot in the door. Place a small bid first to engage. And it seems that Trump is now opting for this tactic by vowing to send a hospital ship to Greenland.
We are going to send a great hospital boat to Greenland to take care of the many people who are sick and not being taken care of there.
Trump's announcement came shortly ahead of a White House dinner where he sat next to Jeff Landry, the Louisiana governor, whom he made a special envoy to Greenland in December. And earlier this year, Tom Dance, Trump's Arctic envoy, argued that Denmark is neglecting health issues in Greenland. Greenland's Center for Public Health notes that as the territory has quickly transformed from hunting society to a knowledge society, it is affected by modern diseases. However, speaking to TVP World at the Arctic Frontiers conference in February, a Danish MP representing Greenland denied the allegations that these challenges are neglected.
We have issues that we need to address between Greenland and Denmark, without a doubt. But I don't think it's the right way to do it. And I think it's so important that we don't lie, that we don't exaggerate in this situation, but that we really respect the people of Greenland.
Denmark and Greenland, unlike the US, have three nationalized healthcare systems. And such accusations have a potential to drive a wedge even further between Nuuk and Washington.
This is really something that is pushing Greenland and US further apart from each other.
It seems, though, that sending in a hospital ship might be Trump's latest idea for bringing Greenland closer his way. Paweł Trzaskowski, TVP World.
As Germany has lost its position as China's biggest trade partner and its domestic production finds itself increasingly under pressure from Chinese competitors, Berlin wants to avert the trend with Chancellor Merz's visit to Beijing on Tuesday. Maciej Wilowski reports.
As Chinese exports flood its markets, Germany is facing an economic tug-of-war. Last year, China overtook the U.S. as Germany's biggest trade partner, a position it also held from 2016 to 2023, with the value of bilateral trade rising to over €250 billion. And German Chancellor Friedrich Merz, who on Tuesday will travel to China for a state visit, seems to be doubling down on that relationship.
I will be traveling to China next week to discuss future cooperation between Europe and Germany on this side and China on the other, with the Great Middle Kingdom, as it calls itself.
But that partnership has turned increasingly lopsided in China's favor.
We are seeing a dramatic slump in German exports to China. The trade imbalance has reached alarming proportions. We have seen a dramatic increase in these imbalances, which were particularly evident last year.
And nowhere is this more apparent than in the auto market. In recent years, exports of Chinese electric vehicles to Europe have soared, undercutting the fortunes of legacy German car makers like BMW and Volkswagen.
What is happening here is that this time, instead of Japan, it's China in the Chinese auto sector, which has really exploded in the past years in terms of the scale of production, the reach of where these cars are purchased, and also their quality and technological sophistication.
Other industries like steel are also at risk from Chinese competition, a fact acknowledged by the Chancellor.
The steel industry in Germany and Europe needs effective foreign trade protection. On the one hand, there are the tariffs imposed in the United States, and on the other, there are the diverted flows of goods, particularly from Asia, and here in particular from China, which are flooding the markets with subsidized steel.
But this week brought some long-awaited good news for the German economy. After a multi-year slump, manufacturing, a key pillar of the German economy, seems to have turned a corner, with output rising in February for the first time since 2022. And the government of Chancellor Merz is committed to reviving the struggling economy, having approved a €500 billion infrastructure spending plan in the fall.
They are willing to take what are pretty radical steps by German standards, like this investment in infrastructure outside of the German rules on deficit spending. They are willing to spend political capital to see these things through.
After several years of recession, that stimulus could help the German economy pull out of its slump and expand more than 1% this year, the latest projections from the IMF showed. The German economy is starting 2026 on the right footing, but increased competition from China could hobble that rebound. Maciej Wilowski for TVP World.
Europe wants to tackle the problem of the destruction of tons of unsold clothes, which pollutes the environment every year. From mid-July onwards, big clothing companies will be banned from simply destroying their unsold products. Gabriela Jolonek has this report.
The European Commission has adopted new regulation to prevent the destruction of unsold clothes, shoes and accessories. Instead of discarding stock, companies will be forced to manage it more effectively, handle returns and explore alternatives such as resale, remanufacturing, donations or reuse.
With these new measures, the textile sector will be empowered to move towards sustainable and circular practices, and we can boost our competitiveness and reduce our dependencies.
Every year in Europe, an estimated 4 to 9% of unsold textiles are destroyed before ever being worn. This wasteful practice generates around 5.6 million tons of CO2 emissions almost as much as Sweden's total net emissions in 2021. The ban on destruction of unsold clothing will come into force on July 19th for large companies, while it will only apply to medium-sized ones starting in 2030. But this creates another legal loophole.
There are some countries that usually take unsold clothes and ship them across the ocean. There are a lot of studies and cases about selling unsold clothes to Africa, the closest continent, with fewer laws on this. And these generate a lot of waste and many open-air garbage bins that produce CO2 and increment unsustainable practices in these countries that don't know how to get rid of those.
As environmental experts emphasize, new EU law on the subject is necessary, but there is a risk it will simply push the problem onto non-EU, much poorer countries. Residents of so-called third world countries, where most of the clothing production is located, are already leaving their homes due to high levels of pollution.
You can see that the clothing is embedded in the environment. So it's creating an environmental catastrophe where to pull this stuff out of the sand is nearly impossible. Take many, many, many more years for that to degrade and release harmful microfibers and toxins into the environment in that process.
In 2026, the Future We Need organization proposed a European citizen initiative called Close the Gap, focused on expanding the definition of refugee to include climate change refugees. Those who had to leave their homes because of environmental destruction caused by human activity. The project is currently awaiting approval from the European Commission. For TVP World, Gabriela Jelonek.
Hundreds of thousands dead, ruined cities and enormous economic losses. What the Kremlin intended as a blitz operation in Ukraine turned into the bloodiest conflict the continent has seen since World War II. But what are the prospects of ending the war in the near future? We'll talk about it with Hugo Dixon, commentator at large at Reuters. Good evening.
Hello, nice to be on the set finally, Maciej. I've done it over the line, but here in Warsaw, it's great to be here.
So good to have you in our studio. So you're on your way to Kyiv. Well, you're a journalist, so for obvious reasons you're going there. But is Ukraine still making headlines in British media? Is it still part, of this public debate in a major way?
Yes, it is, and of course globally, because I write for a global audience, and but I think that the UK has the population is very much committed to Ukraine. And they see this as fighting the good fight, and they also see the threat. They think that if Russia rolls Ukraine over, that will actually threaten Europe, the rest of Europe, and that will indirectly also threaten the UK. I mean, we keep being sucked into wars on the European continent when a strong man, whether it is Hitler or the Kaiser Wilhelm or Napoleon before that, we always get sucked in. So we want to stop Putin. We want to help stop Putin. But of course the UK it cannot do very much on its own. It has to work with a coalition of the willing and has to work with America too. But of course the front line are the Ukrainian people themselves. And I'm very sad to say that after 4 years, this is stuck. And I would not be surprised if we were sitting here in a year's time and it was still stuck. Frankly, I wouldn't even be surprised if it was stuck in 2 or 3 years' time.
That doesn't sound too optimistic to me. Hugo, the West has heaped dozens of sanctions on Russia already, and they don't seem to bring the Russian economy to its knees. So what went wrong?
I think that what's gone wrong is that we've actually have been too slow. I mean, we're now talking in the European Union about the 20th sanctions package. But I think that what that tells you is that the first 19 haven't been tough enough. And so I think we need to heap on the pressure. But what I would say is that although it hasn't brought Russia to its knees, Russia is finally starting to face the pain. Its economy is stuck. Its got high inflation, extremely high interest rates. It's finally got a budget deficit. Its rainy day fund, the liquid assets that it had stashed away before the war, are running dry. And it is pushing a lot of its financial problems, the government is pushing a lot of the financial problems first onto the banking sector and then onto the regional governments. But you can't do that forever. And so I think 2026, if we are to have a breakthrough, we have to heap on the pressure. And the other thing I would say is that the oil price has fallen, and the discount that Russia has to offer to sell its oil has grown bigger. And this is a sign of the sanctions taking their toll. And as you know, hydrocarbons, oil and gas and coal are the main source of revenue for Russia. And
right. So this 20th sanctions package is designed basically to ban Russian oil tankers from entering European ports and being, somehow connected with European companies. However, it's not just Hungary that opposes the idea of the 20th sanctions package. It's now also Cyprus and Greece. Now, given this sort of approach, can we realistically hope for a swift end to the conflict in Ukraine?
No, we can't. We can't. But I do think we can do more. I mean, one of the things that I would do. First of all, we've got to work on America. We've got to work on Trump. And Trump is flipping all over the place. But the Republican Party is split. There are some, like Witkoff, who just want to do a deal with Putin, make money. But there are others, like Rubio, who understand that Russia is a threat. So we've got to work on them. And if we can get them to move, and they have done things. For example, it's because of their sanctions on the Russian oil companies that the oil price that Russia gets for its oil. That's the main reason why that's happened. So we've got to work on America and try and bring them around as much as possible. But there are things that Europe can do on its own.
What more can we do?
Well, one thing that we could do is this so-called coalition of the willing. The coalition of the willing that people are talking about is something that will go to help Ukraine after the war. But what I would like Europe to do, and this is not the European Union, these are individual European countries. That's what the coalition of the willing is, and therefore you don't have to worry about Hungary, is I'd actually like them to go out onto the high seas and grab some of those shadow tankers. Not put sanctions, financial sanctions, say you can't have insurance and you can't come into our ports. Okay, that's very useful. But let's actually go out and grab some of these shadow tankers on the high seas. The French have done that once. The Brits helped the Americans do that once. The Indians have done that 3 times. But, okay, let's actually create a coalition of the willing. The Brits, the French, the Baltics, the Germans, maybe the Poles can come in. And let's actually have a task force and grab some of those tankers. So that's one thing that we could do. Not through the EU, but a coalition of willing countries. A second thing that we can do is with the Russian assets. As you know, before Christmas, we didn't manage to get those Russian assets deployed in a loan to Ukraine.
And why again? Because of
Belgium. Well, it was because
Belgium's particular interest, right?
Well, yes, but the prime reason was because Russia was bullying Belgium, where most of the assets are. And Belgium is small. It can't actually resist Russia on its own. So what we are proposing, I've got an international group that is focused on these Russian assets. What we're proposing is to move the entire Russian account away from Belgium. Not just the assets, but the liabilities as well. Just transfer the entire account to the European Union. And the European Union as a whole is much, much harder for Putin to bully. So that's what we're saying. And I think that we started this sort of mini campaign a couple of weeks ago, and we're beginning to get some traction for that. Now, that is not the same, of course, as actually providing the money to Ukraine. Shifting the account would be a first step. But what it would be like doing is it would be like putting a loaded gun on the table, because Putin would know that once it was no longer controlled by Belgium, but by the EU, it would be far easier to divert that money to Ukraine. So these are a couple of things that we could do in Europe without America's permission and without Hungary's permission. I think as far as, unfortunately, official sanctions within the EU, those require unanimity, economic sanctions, and Hungary can block them so long as Viktor Orbán is Prime Minister. And he might, I mean, he's certainly going to be Prime Minister until April, and who knows what might happen afterwards.
Precisely. Now, the last question, and briefly, please, Steve Witkoff, that's Donald Trump's envoy for Ukraine and the Middle East, if I'm not mistaken, suggested a meeting between Vladimir Putin and Volodymyr Zelensky could take place in coming weeks. Now, do you see it happening?
I very much doubt it, because I don't think that... I mean, Zelensky's been willing to talk to Putin for years, but Putin won't meet Zelensky until he thinks that Zelensky is willing to agree what he wants. And Zelensky is not going to agree it unless somehow America completely twists his arms and forces him to do that. But to be perfectly clear here, both leaders do invite each other to their respective countries, but for whatever reason, neither Zelensky nor Putin. Would you?
No. I would definitely not. Hugo Dixon, commentator at large at Reuters, was our guest this evening. Thank you very much.
What a pleasure. Thank you.
And thank you for watching, and stay with us for more news and interviews here on TVP World.